I recently moved into my dorm room starting as a sophomore in college, and a friend of mine has gave me his old Nintendo 64 to play. I was stoked to say the least. I could finally play all those old games from my youth I haven't touched in at least a decade. His Nintendo 64 came with one yellow controller and a really rubbish copy of Super Smash Bros. And why beggars can't be choosers, it didn't take long as before I got bored of beating up the level 9 CPUs. That weekend I decided to drive around a few neighbourhoods about 20 minutes or so off campus, hitting up a local garage sale. I was hoping to score some good deals from ignorant parents. I ended up picking up a copy of Pokemon Stadium, GoldenEye, F-Zero and 2 other controllers for $2. Satisfied, I began to drive out of the neighbourhood when I got one last house that caught my eye. I still have no idea why I did it. There was no cars in there, and only one table was set up with some random junk on it. However, something sort of drew me to there. I usually trust my gut feeling on these sorts of things, so I got out of the car and was greeted by an old man. His outward appearance was, for lack of a better word, displeasing. It was odd. If you asked me why I thought he looked so displeasing, I couldn't really pinpoint anything. There was something about him that had put me on the edge. I can't explain it at all. All I could tell you is that if it wasn't in the middle of the afternoon and there wasn't other people within the shouting distance, I wouldn't even thought about approaching this man. He flashed a crook smile at me and asked me what I was looking for. Immediately I noticed he must be blind in one eye. His right eye had a glazed over look about it. I forced myself to look into his left eye, trying not to offend, and asked if he had any old video games. I was wondering how I could politely excuse myself from the situation when he would tell me he had no idea what a video game was, but to my surprise, he said he had a few in an old box. He assured me he'd be back in a jiffy and turned head back into the garage. As I watched him hobble away, I couldn't help but notice what he was selling on the table. Littered across his table were rather peculiar paintings, various artworks that looked like ink blots a psychologist might show you. Curious, I looked through them. It was obvious why no one was visiting this guy's garage sale. These weren't exactly pleasing. As I came to the last one, I noticed it looked almost like Majora's Mask with the same heart-shaped body, with the little spikes coming outwards. Intentionally, I just thought that since I was secretly hoping to find this game at this garage sale, something was just projecting itself into the ink blots. However, given the events that happened afterwards, I'm not sure, however. I should have just asked the man about it. I wish I asked this man about it. After staring at the Majora-shaped blot, I looked up and the old man was suddenly there again, arm's length in front of me and smiling. I would admit I jumped out of reflex and laughed nervously as he handed me a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It was the standard grey colour and had no label. Someone has written Majora on it with a black marker. I got butterflies in my stomach as I realised what a coincidence it was and asked how much the old man wanted for it. The old man smiled and told me that I could have it for free. He said it used to belong to a kid around my age and that he didn't live here anymore. There was something weird about how he phrased that, and I didn't really have any attention then. I was too caught up in not only finding the game but getting it for free. I reminded myself to be a bit skeptical since it looked like a pretty shady cartridge and there was no guarantee it would work. However, the optimist inside me injected that maybe it was some beta or pirated version of the game. That was all I needed to be back on the cloud 9. I thanked the man who smiled and wished me saying goodbye then, which at the time is what sounded like to me. I had a nagging doubt that this man had said something else. My fears were confirmed when I booted up the game. To my surprise, it worked just fine, and there was one save file simply named Ben. The man was saying goodbye Ben. I felt bad for him. He was obviously a grandparent going senile. I, for some reason or another, reminded him of his grandson Ben. Out of curiosity, I looked at the save file. I could tell he was pretty far into the game. He had almost all the masks, and 3 out of the 4 bosses remained. I noticed he had used the owl statues to save the game. He was on day 3 by the Stone Tower Temple, with hardly an hour before the moon would crash. I remember thinking it was a shame that he had come so close to beating the game but never finished it. I made a new file named Link out of the tradition, and starting the game, I was ready to relive my childhood. For such a shady looking cartridge, I was impressed with how smoothly it ran, literally just a retail copy of the game, save for a few minor hiccups then and there, textures being where they shouldn't be, random flashes of cutscene at old interviews, nothing too bad. However, the only thing that was a little unnerving was that at some times, the NPCs that would usually call me Link would call me Ben at other times. I figured it was a bug, maybe a fluke in the programming that caused our save files to get mixed up or something. It did kinda creep me out after a while though. Around the time I beat Woodfall Temple, I regrettably erased the Ben file. I had intended to preserve the file out of respect for the game's original owner. It's not like I needed 2 files anyway. I hoped that would solve the problem. It did, and it didn't. Now NPCs wouldn't call me anything. Where my name should be in the dialogue was a blank space. My save files were still called Link, however. Frustrated and with homework to do, I put the game down for a day. I started playing the game again last night, getting the lens of truth working, and working my way towards completing Snowhead Temple. Now some of you more hardcore Majora's Mask players know about the 4-day glitch. For those who don't know, you can Google it. The gist of it is that right as the clock is about to hit a 00000 on the final day, you have to talk to the astronomer and look through the telescope. If you exit the telescope just as the timer hits 00000, the countdown disappears and you essentially have the endless amount of time to finish wherever you are doing, deciding to do the glitch to try and finish Snow Temple. Deciding to do the glitch to try and finish Snowhead Temple, I went in and tried. I happened to get it right the first time and the counter on the bottom has disappeared. When I exited the telescope, I found myself in the Majora's boss room at the end of the game, the trippy boxed area, staring at the Skull Kid hovering above me. There was no sound, just him floating in the air above me, and the background music, which was regular for the area, but still creepy. Immediately my palms were beginning to sweat. This was definitely not normal. Skull Kid never appeared here. I tried moving around the area, and no matter where I went, the Skull Kid would always be facing me. Nothing would happen, and this kept on about around 60 seconds. I thought the game was bugged or something, but I was beginning to doubt that very much. I was about to reach for the reset button when the text appeared on the screen. You're not sure why, but you apparently had a reservation. I instantly recognised that text. You get that message when you get the room key from Angel at the Stockpot Inn. Why was it playing here? I refused to entertain the nothing that it was almost as if the game was trying to. Communicate with me. I started to walk around the room again, testing if it was some sort of trigger that enabled me to interact with something before. Realising how stupid I was, to even think that someone could reprogram the game like it was absurd. Sure enough though, another message appeared on the screen 15 seconds later and was like the first one. It was already a pre-existing phrase, go to the lair on the temple's boss, yes, no. I paused for a second, contemplating what I should press and how the game would react. When I realised I couldn't select no, taking a deep breath I pressed yes, and the screen faded to white with the words dawn of the new day, and the subtext beneath it. Where I transported to filled me with the most intense sense of dread and impending fear I had ever experienced. The only way I could describe the way I felt here is having the feeling of inexplicable depression of a profound scale. I'm not normally a depressed person, but the way I felt here was a feeling that I didn't even know existed. It was such twisted, powerful presence that seemed to wash right over me. I appeared in some sort of weird Twilight Zone version of Clock Tower. I walked out the clock tower, as you normally do when you start for the first day, only to find all the inhabitants were gone. Usually with the 4th day glitch, you can still find the guards and the dog that runs around outside the tower, but they were all gone. What replaced them was this ominous feeling that there was something out here in the same area as me, and it was watching me. I had 4 hearts on my name and my hero's bow, but at this point I wasn't even considering for my avatar. I felt that I personally was in some kind of danger. Perhaps the most chilling was the music. It was the Song of Healing, ripped straight from the game and played in reverse. The music would get louder, building up so you could expect something to happen, but nothing ever did. The constant loop began to wear my mental state. Every now and then I would hear the faint laugh of the Happy Mask salesman in the background. It was quiet enough that I wasn't even sure if I was just simply hearing things, but just loud enough to keep me determined to find them. I looked in all 4 zones of the clock tower only to find nothing, and no one. Text of omission too. West Clock Tower had me walking on the air, and the entire area felt broken, hopelessly broken. As the reverse Song of Healing repeated for what had been the 50th time, I remembered standing in the middle of the South Clock Town, realising that I had never felt so alone in a video game before. As I walked through the ghost town, I don't know whenever it was a combination of out-of-place textures, the atmosphere, and the haunting melody of once peaceful and soothing song, but butchered and distorted. But I was literally on the verge of tears, and I had no idea why I'd hardly ever cry. But sometimes had gripped me out of here and caused this powerful sense of depression that was both foreign and crippling. I tried leaving Clock Tower, but every time I went through the exits, the screen would fade to black, and I would enter a zone of Clock Tower. I tried playing my ocarina. I wanted to escape. I did not want to be here. However, every time I played the Song of Time or Song of Soaring, I would only say your notes echo far, but nothing happens. By this point, it was obvious that the game didn't want me to leave, but I had no idea why it was keeping me. I didn't want to go inside buildings. I felt I'd be too vulnerable to whatever I was terrified of. I don't know why, but I came up with the idea that if I drowned myself at the laundry pool, I would spawn elsewhere and leave. As I ran towards the pool, it happened. Link grabbed his head and the screen flashed for a brief moment at the Happy Mask salesman smiling at me. Not Link, but me, with the Skull Kid screams playing in the background. When the screen returned, I was staring at the Link statue, usually creating the elegy of emptiness. I screamed as the thing stared back at me with the haunting facial experience. I turned away and ran back to the South Clock Tower. To my horror, the statue followed me in that way, and the only best way I could describe it is dissimilar to the Weeping Angels from Doctor Who. Every so often, at random intervals, the animation would play a statue appearing behind me, and it was almost like the thing was chasing me, or, I don't even want to say it, haunting me. By this point I was on the verge of hysterics. However, not even once did the thought of turning off the console occur to me. I don't know why, but I was so wrapped up to it. The terror all felt so real. I tried to shake the statue, but it would literally appear right behind me every single time it went off screen. Link started to make weird animations. I had never seen him to do anything like it. He would flail his arms around, or spasms randomly. The screen would cut to Happy Mask salesman smiling again for a brief moment before I was face to face with that statue again. I ended up running into the Swordsmaster's dojo and ran to back. I don't know why, but in my panic, I wanted some kind of assurance I wasn't alone. To my dismay, I found no one. As I turned to leave, the statue cornered me into the cubby hole in the back. I tried attacking the statue with a sword, but no avail. Confused and backed into the corner, I stared at the statue and waited for him to kill me. Suddenly the screen flashed again to the happy masked salesman, and Link turned to face me, standing upright as the mirror image of the statue, and looking at me with his copy, literally staring at me. Whatever was left of the fourth wall was completely shattered while I was running out of the dojo. Terrified, suddenly the game wrapped up into the underground tunnel. The reverse song of healing queued up again as I was given a brief moment to rest before the statue started appearing again, this time aggressively. I could only take a few steps before it would summon behind me again. I hardly made my way back down to the tunnel and appeared in the Southern Clock Tower. As I ran aimlessly in the sheer panic, a re-dead suddenly screamed and the screen faded to black. Dawn of a new day, and appeared again. The screen faded in, I was standing atop the clock tower with the Skull Kid hovering over me again. Silent, I looked up to the moon was back. Looming just meters above my head, but the Skull Kid stared at me hauntedly with that creepy mask. A new song was playing, the Stone Tower Temple theme played in reverse. In some sort of desperate attempt, I equipped my bow and I fired off a shot at the Skull Kid. It actually hit him, and he played an animation of him reeling back. I fired again onto the third arrow, and a text box appeared that said, "That won't do you any good, hee hee." I was picked up off the ground, levitated upwards on my back, and Link screamed as he burst into flames, instantly killing him. I jumped when this happened. I'd never seen this move used by anyone in the game, and in addition, the Skull Kid didn't even have any moves. As the dead scene played, my lifeless body was still burning. The Skull Kid laughed and the screen faded to black. I reappeared in the same place. I decided to charge at him, but the same thing happened. Link's body was lifted off the ground by some unknown force and burst into flames, again killing him. This time during the death scene, the faint sounds of the reverse song of healing could be heard. On my third and final try, I noticed that there was no music playing, and all there was eerie and silence. I remember that in the original account of the Skull Kid, you're supposed to use your ocarina to either travel back in time or summon the giants. I attempted to play the Song of Time, but before I could hit the last note, Link's body once again burst into flames and he died. As the death scene neared its end, the game began to chug. It was as if the cartridge was simply trying to process a lot of something. When the screen came to, it was the same scene as the first 3 times, except Link was lying on the ground, dead, in a position I had never seen in the game before. His head was tilted towards the camera and the Skull Kid was floating above him. I couldn't move or press any buttons, all I could do was stare at Link's body. After around 30 seconds of this, the game faded with the message, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" before kicking me to the title screen. Upon getting back to the title screen and starting again, I noticed my save file was gone. Instead of Link, it was Your Turn. Your Turn had 3 letters and no masks, no items. I selected the file and returned to the clock tower rooftop scene of Link dead and the Skull Kid hovering over him, with the Skull Kid laughing loop again and again. I quickly hit reset when the game booted up again. There was one more save file added before Your Turn. Then, that save file is right back where I was before when I deleted it, at the Stone Tower's temples with the moon almost crashing. I turned the game off at that point. I'm not superstitious, but this was way too screwed up, even for me, and I haven't played it at all today. I didn't even think I'll get any sleep last night. I kept hearing the reverse song of healing in my head, and I couldn't get past that sense of dread I felt while exploring the clock tower. I drove back to the old man's house today with a buddy of mine. No way I was going there alone to ask him some questions, only to find out there was a for sale sign in the front yard. When I rang the doorbell, no one was home. So now I'm back, writing down the rest of my thoughts and recording what happened. Sorry if some of this had some grammatical errors and whatnot. I'm running out of sleep here. I'm terrified of this game, even more so now that I relived it a second time just writing this down. However, I feel like there's still more to this than meets the eye, and there's something calling me to investigate this further. I think Ben is something in this equation, but I don't know what. If I could get hold of this old man, I would be able to find some answers. I need another day or so to recap before tackling this game again. However, I feel it's already taken a toll on my sanity, but next time I do this, I'm going to record the entire thing. The idea to record only came to me towards the end, so you could only see the last few minutes of what happened, including the Skull Kid and the old edgy statue, but it's on YouTube here.